Now, I want to get one thing is because today I saw this article, but this is an old article on Free Malaysia Today featuring YB Johari Abdul Ghani. And he said that he mooted the idea of there should be tailor-made policies for the Malaysian Indian community, particularly in the B40 category, because the reason for this was, in a report, it saw that most of the members in the B40 community across all ethnicities have SPM qualification or less.
Yeah.
So the idea was that in order to create policies that would elevate the educational qualifications in this group, to remove them from this group, right? We're talking about social mobility here. Now, the thing is, and I also include you in this because you are part of the government. A lot of times this conversation seems to degenerate into we need to create policies, we need to do this, we need to meet, we need to discuss, come up with blueprints and all that. But I'll give you one example. I'll give you two. Say, for example, in the Malaysian Indian blueprint, it was written that 55% of young Indian children do not have access to preschool. Right? So obviously the entire domino effect of this would be that when they go to school, they are behind. And this whole problem continues, right? Now, when you have such a problem, the answer is pretty simple. You do a public to private partnership program where you create preschools in B40 areas to provide them with access to these schools at subsidized prices. Problem solved. Another one is Tamil schools. Now the big issue is falling enrollment. Right? It was declining and all that. But the reason is not that people don't want to go to Tamil schools. It's also because of accessibility. Okay. A lot of Tamil schools are in rural areas, in estates where Indians have urbanized and come out. So that could be why. Another thing also is that the location of these schools are so close to one another.
Yeah.
So they are competing for the same pool. So the idea is move it, relocate. So why is it when the answer is so simple, when you are in government, you have the resources and all that, why not do anything about it for the past 50 years, 60 years?
Okay, very good question. Now, I want to throw a question back and make you probably think a bit. Now, would you change something that works for you?
Works for me?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't, right?
Yeah, it works for me, yeah.
So for the past 50 years, it has been working for them. That's in simple terms.
Okay.
Now, why has it been working for them? It's because of...
Who are we talking about by them?
I can basically...
The shadowy figures.
So whoever them is, essentially would be people who are within a system of governance and administration. You've got to understand two things here. One, I've got to do what's best for me before I consider what's best for you. What's best for me is to spend the least amount of money and make everyone happy equally or unhappy equally. So meaning that I can't make you happy as much as I make him or her happy. So what I'll do is I'll make both of you equally unhappy. You understand? So meaning that you get enough, but you still want more.
One more.
He or she gets enough, but they'll still want more. So you can't come and say that I favored you. They can come and say that I favored them. Now, of course, within the system, that's how cronyism came to be. Because you got to understand, as much as I'm trying to make everyone, balanced out, I've got to also take care of my interests. So without getting too much into the philosophical concept of all these things, this is where the issue or the challenge was. Malaysia, at that point of time, we were at critical crossparts in our future, or heading towards our future. Not in our future, we were at the crossparts, looking ahead of ourselves and thinking about what was going to be important. And many people within that region, I would say, if you really look back at history, this was when actually Singapore decided to go on their own, and then we had to also rethink about what we were going to do. Now, for failure of looking or having a long-sighted vision, we took more steps to address what were the needs at the current moment. Okay, and this was when you would have heard of things like the
NEP and all that.
The NEP and of course various other initiatives, FELDA. Of course, if you look at it at that point of time, the idea or the philosophy again was to see how we can accelerate the development of certain segments of the community that were hardcore poor. Now, because of the heavy focus or emphasis that were given on all these different segments, I would say, the parts that we as a community needed were not looked into because of resources.
They were limited at the time.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because why? If I'm going to spend at least 40 to about 50% of my resources into making sure that these are the promises that I fulfill to a certain group of people, I have to compromise my resources elsewhere. It's like running a company.
Yeah.
So when you run a company, sometimes you have to spend more for a certain part.
Yeah.
You go to another department and say, hey, you know what, budget slash this year. No choice lah.
No choice lah. Yeah,
if CEO tells you that, no choice lah. Jalan. Whatever you got, you make it happen. So
you work with what you have.
Exactly. So that was what we did. And that's why you see legacy issues of Tamil schools in close proximities, in outskirt areas, because it was looking at the need at that point. So the position of the society or community was such where our geography was situated at this location. Now, can we do anything about that now? In a simple way of just answering you, I would say no. Okay? Why? Because the solutions are expensive. If we were to relocate every school that was there, if we were to repurpose all those buildings, every solution has a cost to it.
But I feel that's a cop-out though. And I'll tell you why. I recently had a guest here. She was the founder of a group of schools called the Gains Education Group, right? And she basically started this by saying that she wanted to teach Islam using English as a medium.
Okay.
And what she has done is now she has grown her business to have 83 learning centers across Indonesia, Malaysia, and soon she'll be in Qatar as well. Why is it that the mobility in the private sector is so efficient, so quick, when the government has all the resources? Why can't they do it?
Okay. To answer your question is this, right? You've got to understand the direction that the government takes with the private sector. Now, when you're looking at a view of the government, or you're looking from the lens of the government, you've got to understand that, okay, number one, before we even start talking about how they support these people on a welfare basis, I've got to take care of them, which means I've got to spend money. I've got to relook at my processes. I've got to relook at my structure. I've got to relook at the bureaucracy of the system. I've got to relook at my alignment. And most importantly, I've got to look back at the assessments that are made in order to ensure that everything is done quick enough in order for me to bring an investor in or a company. Now, all that takes up a lot of time, because you've got to understand today, most countries, especially the first world countries, I think the best that we can learn from is Singapore. So Singapore does this in the most seamless manner. They get it done because everything today is all done in a virtual form. So the moment you come in, they have got data about you. They've got all these different ways of analyzing you within a system. And then by the time they get you approved for you to be an investor or for you to come into the country, it takes you less than the time required for you to be in Malaysia. Now, with everything that the government has to spend in order to make sure that these people come in and then set up shop here and eventually run their businesses for a significant amount of time. We don't want them to set up like a business today and then within 5 years when the government changes, they say, oh, you know what? We're running.
Yeah, of course you don't want that.
So why I say it's not easy, or in simple, just to give you simply how I don't see it as a immediate need, is because someone has to buy up these properties the moment they relocate. So you've got to look at basically getting those approvals done. While getting those approvals done, you've got to make sure that your next building is purposed to be a school, for example. Now, you've got to look at the timeline of all this stuff. And when you look at the time and the money that you're going to spend doing all this, you've got to ask yourself a question. Now, if I'm going to give the Indian community, say for example, 100 million or 150 million on an annual basis, am I going to spend a portion of that money doing this stuff? Because government is not going to carve out another set of budget just to satisfy you. We are dealing with limited resources. We've got to look at the situation from, again, you cannot just be on the receiving end and say, oh, you know what, we are victims. You've got to be pragmatic about the whole situation. The situation is such where if I am speaking to you and I am requesting something, I need to know whether you are really interested in funding that particular endeavor that I have. If not, if it's not in your plate or not in your appetite, you will not spend that money. The same way the government is looking at things right now.
And that is a very pragmatic and blunt way of putting it. I mean, it's honest, like it's honest.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what the government. Okay, look at the government's resources right now.
I mean, even in the last budget, so there was no additional allocation.
Yeah, because you know why? They are dealing with. We have to borrow money. You know. You know the rates right now. Malaysia has to bear for someone's sins lah.
Yeah, we don't mention names.
We has to, and when I say Malaysia, it's you and I. It's taxpayers, right? So, I'm not saying this particular person was the only one who did this lah. Okay, we have been dealing with this
for a long time,
for a very long time.
Yeah.
Okay. God bless a certain someone who recently passed as well. So he has got a certain reputation as well.
You're going to get me cancelled. Or in jail or something. I don't know.
Like I said, we're not mentioning names, so it's fine. But, I'm talking about issues that have been there. And again, many people are quick to critique Datuk Seri Anwar. You've got to understand the steps that are taken right now is to ensure that every aspect of a certain administration, especially within the state, that they have got influence on, whether it's, of course, Selangor right now is a very close call lah. Okay, they've got to do a lot of work there, but the other states, they've got to make sure that they take care of their bases really well, and they've got to understand that the partnership, especially with Sabah and Sarawak now, is of critical importance. Speaking from a political standpoint, this is, of course, a long-term game that he is also looking at. It's not easy because you've got to balance that with administration. And of course, like what certain people have mentioned that, it's a 5-year game. You try to segment it within 2, and then the next 3 years you start looking at your political survival and stuff like that. But it's not as easy as that.
So from what you're saying, it pretty much sounds like we aren't in the plans. It sounds like that. It is. And look, I accept your answer.
Do you want to be cancelled or not?
No, I mean...
No, I'm not saying that
we're
not... Okay, so it's not that we're not in the plans. There are certain parts that we need that's within, or rather in the plans as a need. So for example, everyone needs accessibility to free market with the least amount of barriers. So the government right now is taking a uniform stand to say that anyone that comes in, so it's not specifically race-based. So that's where you look at needs-based, and you start pushing for policy implementations that are centered on what is needed rather than, a certain race group or a certain bangsa will get kemudahan-kemudahan tertentu. We are not saying that, and we are not even doing that, because if you're looking at the system today, it has to a certain extent shifted to making the playing field a bit more level.
Okay.
So today if you look, okay, you are now doing a podcast, right? Did any agency member come here and say, you know what?
Touch it.
No, the thing is, because at the end of the day, people are doing podcasts all over Malaysia. Now, of course, at the end of the day, people will be talking about freedom of speech and all this stuff, right? But I think so far the government, I mean, kudos to them. I'm not, of course, this is not an effort to praise them too much. Of course, they have their, like what I said, with all the kinds of press that they've been getting with the court cases, and of course recently with the ethics of media, that has been discussed about. These are not good. It's not a good reflection of what
as compared to what they have promised.
Reform
before.
Is lah.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think, like I said, Datuk Seri Anwar is dealing with a very different set of challenges today, and these are things that need to be treaded better. So to answer your question for the final time, in the most, I think, conclusive way possible, there are plans to look at the needs of the community rather than the community itself. So
that means take a more macro approach.
a micro rather than a macro.
Micro rather than macro.
So if you look at a poor, and this was very aptly put, if you look at a poor Indian, a poor Malay, and a poor Chinese, everyone has got the same need. They have to put food on their table. They have to be able to send their children to school. They have to be able to have social safety nets for themselves. And these are basic necessities if you're talking about your right to live today in a country.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's the kind of approach that the government is trying to take. But of course, if you really look at what are the efforts required and the kinds of initiatives that have to be taken to communicate this, that's why I said the visibility has to be important. Earlier you asked about something that Prabha has to be, or has to work on rather. Number one is visibility. Number two is him being more outspoken about, the kinds of work that they do. Because at the end of the day, if you don't talk about this stuff and you don't talk about it enough, people will not remember it.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
Now,